to talk a little bit about a recent podcast that Joe Rogan did with Dr. Peter McCullough. And let me start by saying I think that the conversation is a necessary conversation and a good conversation, regardless if you agree or disagree or the details involved. And that's not that it's lost on me the difficult situation the government, social media platforms, media, et cetera, is in, because I do believe there is, to an extent, a good faith effort to limit misinformation, and there's concern for people's well-being, and there's concern for people or countries or hackers or bots intentionally spreading misinformation. So I know it's tricky and it's difficult, and censorship, for lack of a better word, is something that's being used maybe with people thinking it's the right thing. I've talked about it in other videos. I personally don't think that's the answer for various reasons, but I don't want to get into that right now. What I want to talk about is what I thought about the discussion. So again, to be clear, I think the discussion should happen. I think it should be aired. I think it should be on YouTube. It should be anywhere where people want to consume it, and people should view it and make their own decisions. With that said, there were some things about the discussion that concerned me. And I wanted to talk about them a little bit because I think it's important, and I think identifying these issues is kind of at the root of some of the problems we have today. Who to trust, where to get our information, etc. So I thought Peter McCullough did a good job of bringing facts and data. He's obviously very credible. He's treated a lot of COVID patients. He's been peer-reviewed and published, and the credibility is clearly there for him. And he clearly, from what I could tell, and I'm by no means a scientist or a doctor, but he clearly seemed to understand the virus and the situation and all that. So I'm not dismissing or downplaying any of that. My concern with the conversation was, and this is what I look at, was his credibility as somebody we can trust. Not his credibility as a doctor or a scientist or a COVID expert or a virus expert or a vaccine expert, but it's just somebody that we can listen to and say with as much confidence as we can, this is somebody that I can trust what they're saying. Because when I think about somebody that I can trust what they're saying, right? Somebody that I need to trust, who's an expert on a topic that I am not an expert on, I have to look at how their mind works. I have to look at their thought process. I have to look at their awareness. I have to look at their biases and blind spots. I have to look at all that because that's at the root of it. Everything they're telling me, everything they're thinking, all the information, the data they're analyzing, the medical advice that's being given is all being filtered through their mind and their thought process and their lens that they think. So when I listen to a podcast like that, I'm not just listening for the information, which I thought was interesting, useful information to the extent that I could tell. I'm listening to hear about, can I trust them and how their mind works? And with Peter McCullough, my concern was he's a human. Which sounds silly, but it's true. So I'm not just trying to place the blame on him, but he's a human. He's a human, and my concern was he made it more about himself than about the truth. Not completely, and this is just my opinion, but when I listened to that podcast, there was too many instances where I heard him talking about his accolades. And he was the first one to speak out on this. And he's the one that got the Senate to change this rule. Or he's the one that got people to be thinking about vaccines. And he's the one that worked with the Sri Lanka government to get rid of COVID there. And he's the one that published the paper. And he's the one that's doing the McCullough report every week. And a lot of he, and a lot of, for lack of a better word, vanity. Now, it's a delicate line, right? Because he's trying to build his credibility. He's trying to explain why he has authority on the topic. So I'm not suggesting it's easy. But when I hear somebody so focused on themselves and referencing, I was just on this media outlet, and in particular in his case, he kept referencing Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham. Now, personally, I don't know them personally, but same principle that I started this with, I worry about those two individuals just like I would worry about Sanjay Gupta or Don Lemon or Rachel Maddow or whoever it is, right? These are people as well that when I listen to them, I worry about that filter. I worry about the awareness of their biases. So when he is talking on Joe Rogan and saying, I said this to Laura Ingraham or to Tucker Carlson and they almost fell off their seat and they couldn't believe it and they were saying this, you start to connect those dots and say, okay, he seems to be very proud of himself, and he's bragging a lot about what he did to help save the country and what he's doing to save the country. It's not that he wasn't giving other people credit, but there was a heavy focus on him. Then the reference points he was touching on weren't necessarily the most reliable reference points. Then you see that he has his own show and his own, McCullough Report, podcast, whatever it is that he's plugging. And at one point he even mentioned during the podcast that he has a lot of legal fees. And there was somebody offering like $1 million to have a debate on this topic. And he said, I'd love to be a part of that. I'll take the $1 million. I could use it for my legal fees. Again, he's a human, so I'm not making it personal against him. We all struggle with this. But when I see somebody who has a degree of vanity, which we all do to an extent, and is making it about him to an extent, when I see somebody who's using reference points that I don't think are necessarily credible, when I see somebody who is motivated to get people to listen to them, who's motivated by money and legal fees that he's trying to pay off, you start connecting those dots and you say, how credible is this person to trust? It's not that the information they're saying is necessarily wrong, but I have to question their thought process. I have to question their ability to be aware enough to understand where their own biases and blind spots lie. Because if Dr. Peter McCullough, again, just my opinion, isn't aware enough of his biases to recognize that he is making the story more about him than he should, if he's not aware enough to recognize that possibly he's incentivized or motivated by trying to plug his show or make a certain amount of money or whatever it might be, if he's not aware of those things enough to control them better than he did in the conversation with Joe Rogan, then where else are those biases and blind spots popping up that he doesn't know about it and I don't see it? I don't know. And that's the problem. I just don't know. I talk about Richard Feynman all the time. He's not a god, he's not perfect, but he's somebody that I think is the closest or is at least closer to getting it right. That almost ferocious humility to say, no matter how smart I am, no matter what I think I know, I don't know shit. I just follow the information, I follow the logic. I'm not trying to make the story about me. I'm aware of the fact that I'm unaware, so I'm cautious. And I'm hesitant, and I don't speak in absolutes, and I don't speak in ways in which it seems like it's more about me than the truth. That's the type of thing I'm looking for. Now, again, I said it. Dr. Peter McCullough, Terry McMullen, Joe Rogan, Anthony Fauci, everybody, they're all humans. So we all fall victim to this, which is why I talk about all the time. The best we can do is constantly be acting in accordance with that, questioning ourselves, checking ourselves, making sure. And I don't believe Peter McCullough did that enough. Now, I'll say it again. Does that mean he should be censored? Absolutely not. Does that mean what he was saying about the vaccines possibly being dangerous, what he was saying about COVID was wrong? No, not necessarily. I don't know enough personally. But when we're trying to see where do we hang our hat, where do we place our trust, where do we take that leap of faith and say, okay, this is what I believe, I think we have to factor that into the equation. We have to consider the source and look at the reliability of it. We have to look at their awareness, their intellectual sophistication, not about science, not about viruses, not about vaccines, but about their intellectual sophistication to understand where do their biases lie, where are their blind spots, and are they accounting for them? Are they at least aware that they might exist and showing me that humility to kind of show that they're trying to check against it? And I just didn't see it enough. And that concerns me. And that's the problem I think we have in the world. We have to trust somebody, right? We live in such a complex society today. We can't be experts on everything or even most things. So we have to trust people that they're doing it right. In this case, it's the medical community. There has to be some level of trust. And for many of us, we're trying to figure out who do I trust? Do I trust Fauci and the government and the doctors that are telling us we need to get vaccinated and this virus is so dangerous? Or do I trust Peter McCullough and the other doctors that, in this case, have been on Joe Rogan? And we're trying to see where do I place my bet ultimately? And for me, the struggle is I don't know where the fuck to place my bet, right? We have to make a decision. But I see things in Peter McCullough that I see in Anthony Fauci. I see similarities there. Not saying they're exactly the same, not saying it's at the same level, it's up to interpretation, but that potential lack of intellectual sophistication and awareness of where their blind spots lay, that I see in both cases. And that concerns me. So I make this video mainly because I think that's an important point that we all need to be considering more. How do you fix this, right? All right, I can identify a problem maybe that I see, but how do you fix it? Well, to me, it's holding people accountable. It's pressing people more to say, hey, Are you aware enough of your blind spots? Are you aware enough that you're making the story more about you than the truth? Are you aware that there's a dynamic set up here that might incentivize you, even if unintentionally or unconsciously, to act a certain way that maybe isn't in accordance with the truth, right? Again, maybe it's money, maybe it's ratings for your podcast, whatever it is. Maybe it's a hero syndrome where you just want to feel like you're saving the day, which seemed to come out in that podcast too, which aren't necessarily bad things, but they take away clarity in our thinking. They can taint the way in which we go through our thought processes. So we have to be looking for that, and we have to be calling that out and holding people accountable. It's the best we can do. It's the only thing I think we can do. So that's the main reason I make this video. The second is, right hand in hand with it. I think for a lot of people, they listen to that podcast and it becomes Bible, for lack of a better phrase, right? It becomes, well, look, that's it. That's the truth. I know that's the truth. And maybe it is. But for me, when I'm trying to determine, is that the truth? Is that the closest to the truth? I have to go to the credibility of the source. And in this case, he checks out scientifically, medically, all that stuff. He's an expert on that. But does he check out, is his credibility there for his intellectual sophistication and awareness of himself? I don't know that it is. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to it. It doesn't mean he's not right. It means have a healthy level of skepticism about it. Recognize he's a human just like everybody else. And there's potential that there's more at play here than just working towards the truth, even if it's subconscious, even if it's unintentional. And a lot of people might say, hey, fuck off. Like, who are you? Who are you to judge? Like, I thought the podcast sounded totally fine. Maybe it's just my impression of it. Maybe it's just my opinion. But I think it's important enough to at least be discussed, to at least think through it and challenge ourselves to say, hey, was he making the story more about himself than he should have? Maybe he wasn't. And if he wasn't, and you go through that thought process, then cool. Then you're all good. But I'd at least like more people to ask the question. I think it's worth it.